Happy Spooktober, and welcome to Cohesive Friendship Unit. My name is Chris, just me today. My first few hours of Saints and Sinners were the hardest and most frustrating experience with the game. A control scheme stretched to the limit, a lack of explanation of mechanics, and unclear objectives had me right up to my limits. The more I played, though, the more fun it got, to the point where, in the end, I see huge promise in a sequel to this game. This is the closest you will get to Fallout New Vegas-style gameplay in VR, and is ultimately one of my preferred VR experiences, but getting to that point took me some time. This is actually one of the harder reviews I've done, so let me try to break things down. And before we do break those things down, please consider subscribing. We would really appreciate your support. We're doing a giveaway for Cyberpunk 2077 with less than 1 month to go to hit 3,500 subs. You could be the winner. Please consider subscribing. We would really appreciate your support. Saints and Sinners is a VR game which takes place in the Walking Dead universe. It is an independent story, though, so no prior knowledge or like or dislike towards the IP is required. I find it to be quite disconnected. The only real common thread is there are zombies that are called walkers, and the art style is somewhat similar to some other Walking Dead titles. This is a roughly 6-hour campaign where you play as a survivor called the Tourist in New Orleans, and there are multiple endings to this story. The promise is there. There's warring factions, you're in an open city, there are dynamic quests, and there are side quests, but ultimately the grand ideas fall a bit short in reality. Things are confusing or boring to sit through from a story perspective. It does a good enough job to rope you in, but you won't be playing this for the narrative. What you will be playing this for is for the gameplay. Super satisfying gameplay. Killing walkers is an extremely visceral experience. One of the better to best hand combat implementations, especially for a zombie killing simulator that is highly focused on melee combat. You can fully roam the world. They're sectioned off into smaller areas. It's not a true open world, but that's kind of made up for with mechanics like climbing. You can climb a surprising amount of things, and it gives you a tactical strategy to sneak into buildings or to climb onto things to avoid walkers. You can take on side quests while you're in the area, and all along the way you are upgrading your character as you retreat to your safe school bus while you wait out the night. And in a lot of ways, this game is actually similar to Breath of the Wild. There's a heavy emphasis on breakable weapons, and a large part of the main quest is using in-game pictures to find cache locations. And while this all sounds fun, and it is, and it can be fun once you get past a lot of the negatives. And I want to start with controls. This control limit is simply stretched a bit too far. Before we get into the huge issues with the control scheme, I do just want to highlight there is no teleportation. You are required to use free locomotion for this game. There are vignettes that you can add to your vision, which should help reduce nausea if you have problems. I tend to prefer teleporting, but I was able to play this game just fine after a few sessions with those vignettes. So, for the controls, a lot of what you do, and this is a good thing, a lot of your controls are not bound to button presses. They are actually things that you do in game. For example, you have 2 holster spots to keep quick access weapons. You have 1 two-handed weapon slot behind your back for quick access. You have your backpack, and these aren't just button presses. These are actually you reaching over your shoulder to perform these actions. And while that does sound good on paper, and it is quite good on paper, the problem is there's just too many things to the point where the game can actually miss your input. Because let me just break something down. Like I said, you have 2 weapons to access at your hip. That's fairly straightforward. But then you have your flashlight on your left chest, and you have your quest book on your right chest. And it's often the game can sometimes pull up your flashlight or pull up your book when you didn't mean to do that. It's also entirely possible that when you're reaching down to pick something up, you pick up one of your hip holster items instead of the item on the ground. Then we have your backpack, which is typically accessed from your left shoulder, and we have your two-handed melee, which is typically accessed from your right shoulder. Sometimes when you're going for your right shoulder two-handed melee in the middle of a tense situation, you pull out your backpack. That is not the way to kill a zombie. When you meant to pull out your two-handed axe and you end up pulling out a silly backpack. Another thing that is curiously missed quite a bit is actually storing items. A lot of times items just ended up being thrown behind you or thrown down below you instead of putting in your holsters or putting in your backpack. That is just seemingly a limitation of the control scheme being pushed to its limits. If they calmed down on some of the amount of things, I think they could optimize the control scheme quite a bit. Something as simple as moving that quest book, which you don't really access too often, to a different location from right next to your flashlight could go a long way. But the controls are not the only negative. The mechanics also leave a bit to be desired on occasion. They are extremely poorly explained and balanced, despite there being a pretty significant tutorial that you have to play before starting the game. You're taught how to do the combat, sure, but you're not explained how any of the systems work, and they don't work the way you would think. Oftentimes, eating food actually drains your health, and that increases your stamina. You need medicine to increase your health. That is, in my experience, unbelievably unbalanced to actually increase your max health back to full. I found medicine once in the entire campaign playthrough. I don't know. I must have been doing something wrong. That or something just wasn't explained to me. So often I was sitting at half health. And the time/watch mechanic, I honestly still don't know how to read the watch. Maybe I'm just dumb, but there's a time limit each day. You're supposed to leave the area before night comes because that's when the walkers become more dangerous, and you rely on this watch. I found it almost impossible to read or understand the watch. I just went off the oral cues that it gives you. The world, it is not a true open world. It is a series of small segmented pieces, and the pieces are fairly small, often about one city block. And that's fine, except it would have felt a bit better if it was a truly open world, and there are occasions where you can actually navigate from one location to another, and that makes the world feel really good. It's a bummer that this couldn't be done for the entirety of the game. I imagine part of that has to do with the bringing of this game to the Oculus Quest and Oculus Quest 2. And unfortunately, a lot of the environments where they had an opportunity, since things are segmented to have really unique locations, a lot of the locations do feel very much the same, and it is kind of a breath of fresh air when you do get that diverse location every so often in the game. Quests are there. There are side quests, and they are dynamic, but they're relatively few and sometimes have unclear goals. The combat is, well, very good. The AI is absolutely horrible for the human characters. They are like literally the dumbest AI for humans I've ever seen in a video game. And while that sounds like a lot of negatives, you still have moments where you'll enter an area trying to find a hidden cache, where you'll bump into a survivor with a neat sounding side quest, but the risk sounds too great to do the quest, so you just kill them for the reward. This might later influence your ability to access the cache you were originally looking for, depending on how that character is aligned and where that cache is located, and that is really cool, and that's what makes this game so great once you're able to get into it. When it comes together, it really works. When you understand the systems, it mostly works, and when you understand the limitations of the combat and get into the rhythm of having enough supplies to craft good weapons, the combat really works. So in the end, Saints and Sinners is a sneak peek of the future of full-length VR games. I see a future game and or sequel to Saints and Sinners with a fully open world, better AI, and tweaked controls that would really push this concept to the next level. But for now, Saints and Sinners will do as a deep game to get lost in once you get past its shortcomings. That's going to do it for me today. I will catch you next time.